Okay, welcome to Free Will, Science, and Religion. My name is George Ortega. I'm here with Trick Slattery, Chandler Klebs, and David Joseph, and we are basically exploring why we don't have a free will, why it matters. And today's theme is the idea that believing in free will causes denial. There's basically denial is a psychological defense mechanism that happens unconsciously, and it's a response to feeling indicted a lot of times, or it's a response sometimes to kind of like to being faced with evidence that is somehow threatening to one's either self-image or one's belief system. So like what happens with free will belief, for example, let's take the I think what's probably the most important example of climate change. The evidence that climate change is happening is so monumental. I mean, it's so incontrovertible, but it's very indictive. I mean, the scientists are telling people who almost all believe in free will that what we're doing as a civilization, as a population, as individuals, is so immoral, so selfish, so reckless and irresponsible that by 2100 we might be reduced to like less than a billion people. I mean, it might create such havoc on the planet. When people hear that, they naturally make the connection. Oh my God, my friends and I are so evil. We're really, really, really evil. And of course, people are concerned with happiness. Happiness is really what people are about. And like interestingly, one of the four personality traits that's most correlated with happiness is self-esteem. So that when these scientists are telling them they're doing something so evil, they can't admit it, they can't face it. So unconsciously, they will either deny the evidence that they say no, the scientists must have it wrong, or some of them are conspiracy theorists that say, well, like this is all political, but in some way they're unable to objectively look at the. So that's just one example, and there's others. And again, in order to part of our challenge is to try to get people to understand why this is not a trivial, inconsequential matter. This is a matter of great importance to civilization. So guys, I mean, you might want to kind of come up with other examples of this kind of like free will based denial and why it's harmful to us as individuals and society.
Well, I actually had a question. I'm sure maybe you've heard this before, but what if someone was to turn around and say, okay, I don't have free will, and so I'm not to blame for the environmental damage that's being caused?
Well, you're right, and so that's the next problem. In other words, like, so for example, like we who understand we don't have free will, we do what's right, not because because of the belief in free will, whatever, but because of consequences. We understand that like when we do certain behavior, certain actions, there will be certain consequences, and so it's the same kind of thing. So um, when people can hopefully become objective enough to look at the evidence for climate change, then it's not because of this imagined belief in free will or the lack thereof that they're considering. It's because they would care about their children and their grandchildren and future generations. So so yeah, they would say, yeah, it's not really our fault, so we shouldn't feel bad. But if we really care about the world and the people we leave behind, we really need to act.
Right, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and then we have to educate people on that. I think that's part of the whole explaining why we don't have free will is as educating people on the differences between fatalism, whereas they're fated to do something and they won't. Their conscious thinking and doing doesn't have any say in regards to that happening, and the fact that they're causally part of the equation that leads to the future state. So that includes their thinking and their doing. So we kind of have to educate people on that part because that's another thing that I think people conflate is the difference between fatalism and determinism, for example. Um, but in the most part, I think what George is talking about is that people don't they already do believe in free will, and since they do, it leads to this denial um, because they think that they're freely choosing the option that is this negative consequence, and so they're going to rationalize that. So because they automatically think that they have free will. So, and if we can educate people away from that, then that might change that denial.
Yeah, so Chandler, so like, climate change is kind of like a sociological, it's like we're all doing something wrong. But can you think of things in our personal lives where where with this denial would kind of like maybe make our relationships with other people much more difficult than they would have to be?
Well, yeah, because I mean, I think in everyday life we have regrets. Like we said something, and then somebody gets all offended and mad, and then we think, well, if I had known that this person wasn't gonna take it right, then I wouldn't have said that. We have these regrets, and what's interesting about it is that most of our regrets are things, well, if we had known something, then we wouldn't have done that thing. And so it's a lack of knowledge. And so we can't feel responsible. I mean, that's kind of the point of our podcast, is that we don't have our free will. We can't really be responsible for our mistakes and regrets. But I think what happens with some people is, rather than just saying, well, I said this thing that offended this person, instead, if they believe in free will, well, then they start going into denial about it, and they start saying, well, it's their fault, they took it the wrong way, because they are able to blame other people in order to take the blame off of themselves. So that's where the harm comes. So a lot of denial is about blaming other people. Like, for example, somebody could blame others about the climate change thing. They could do that, and like, they could say, well, I'm not the one polluting the planet, it's other people doing that. But yeah, we've got to think of other examples in daily life that everyone can relate to, because not everybody believes that climate change is a thing. So I'm trying to think of something that everyday people can relate to. I want to think of something, but maybe somebody else has an example while I'm thinking.
Well, I think the topic of animal welfare is probably one of them, that people see the horrors that go on, and for example, the meat industry, and they kind of what they do is they close their eyes to it. They don't watch the things that are happening. They avoid them like the plague. It's the same thing when you see like those commercials on TV that you see like the person starving in another country, and you flick the channel. A lot of people flick the channel because they don't want to see it. They'd rather stay in their bubble and deny that stuff. Their psychology can't cope with the idea that they're just allowing it to happen, and that they have the free will to, according to them, not, or to help that problem, but they're not doing it.
And so there's
So they'll deny it.
Yeah,
Basically.
there's probably some research. There's probably some research that suggests that, like, people, for example, there's different problems in the world, and there are problems that we kind of like have some kind of like role in. Of course, we don't have free will, but then there's other problems that aren't really like up to any of us at all. So like I would guess that people are much more likely to invest, in helping solve or whatever problems that people are not, basically involved in, that they don't believe they're free, causing of their free will or contributing of their free will, for this reason. Because, like, in other words, like, to face a problem like that is to face that guilt and that pain. And you're right. I mean, people just like, they'll deny, they'll just not even look at the evidence in order to do that.
What Trick said about people ignoring the evidence, ignoring, something like that, they don't want to look at it. There's a lot of people who don't want to look at, the meat industry, the dairy industry. They don't want to watch the movie Earthlings. They don't want to know that these animals are suffering. They want to go on believing that good cheese comes from happy cows from California. Yeah, that's one of the signs that someone's denial is like, well, they don't want to look at this evidence because, it will change them and they might feel guilty, they might feel responsible. Although there is another aspect of denial, George. For example, somebody doesn't want to know that, people are, that whether it's humans or other animals, that they're suffering and dying by the millions or whatever every day or something. Part of the reason that they may not want to look at that evidence and know what's going on is because they feel like there's really nothing they can do to stop it, like this hopelessness.
Okay, Chandler, we have to differentiate between denial that's based on assumed responsibility, that's based on the free will belief, and other kinds of like what I would describe perhaps as either apathy or indifference. In other words, for example, there's a lot of illnesses in the world, a lot of conditions, and that basically, some people will donate a lot to finding cures and all that. Some people won't at all. So that would be kind of like they're not really denying that these illnesses are happening, and they're because like everybody knows that this stuff is not really up to us, or a lot of them aren't. So like it's not there's no sense of indictment in it, but they just for whatever reason maybe don't care. Whereas like this free will based denial, like again like um, relating it to climate change, it's the fact that because people believe in free will, they're not it's a responsibility based denial. It's a denial based on an indictment, that doesn't allow them to look at the evidence. So again, and even with climate change, free will based denial I don't think is the only kind of denial. There may be a denial. Some people who've read a bit about climate change say like, my God, this is so horrific, what we may be facing, that I can't believe that, like, let's say if they believe in God, I can't believe God would do this, or in basic goodness, I can't believe this is happening. So that would be a denial that really isn't based on the free will belief. But still, I would contend that, at least maybe 20-30% of the denial would be.
Yeah, so that's a good distinction to make, George, because there's different kinds of denial, different reasons for why people go into denial. Like there is the type that we've been talking about, how free will belief, the people feeling responsible makes them want to deny that there's an actual problem that they're contributing to, because then they feel like they're to blame. So that's one type. The other type that I mentioned earlier was that, well, they know there's a problem, but they don't want to look at it because they don't feel like there's anything they can do about it. But then what you mentioned after that was that there's people who, they simply just don't care what's going on. They're in denial because they're in their own world. They don't care what's going on, have any desire to do anything about it.
Yeah, I think it's the denial that when people actually try to rationalize the idea, when they try to make up facts about the idea that aren't true, that kind of relates more to the free will one. For example, the global warming, where people make up all these, they skew the results. They don't look at all the facts, so they rationalize that, oh, global warming isn't human based. It's happened throughout history and all this other stuff. So they make up all these details because their psychology can't handle the fact, because they think they have the free will and things like that. These are the rationalizations happen. So yeah, the just denial of just being not caring or whatever. That's one thing. But when people actually start to make cases against something that is obvious to a sane person, then yeah, I think free will probably has a little bit to do with that.
Yeah, and another thing is free will belief allows us to blame other people for tragedies that they didn't even necessarily that they didn't cause, even if they had a free will they couldn't cause. Like, for example, a tsunami or an earthquake or a tornado happens in a certain area, and they say what, and then they say, well, those people deserved it because they were homosexuals, or because the women wore jeans, or and then they start blaming those people. Well, they deserved it, so it's good that they got killed in this disaster.
Good
Yeah.
point, Chandler.
Though,
Absolutely.
though they might actually believe that. So
Yeah.
see, yeah, and I think some of the, for example, the global warming people, they actually truly do believe the bad statistics and stuff like that. So it's not all denial. It's some people just aren't able to reason. Uh,
Okay, guys. So like, yeah, we got it. Let's challenge ourselves to reach for these personal issues again, because our mission, our what we need to do is get people to care about this. So like a lot of times, like with the climate change thing, fine, we may be responsible, but it's a global, it's a societal issue, and as individuals, even though we understand we don't have free will, we don't have so much power, to change things. But look, in personal relationships, can we think of like between a couple or people, how like one person would blame something on the other person, and because the other person believes they have a free will, they are going to kind of like defend themselves and deny that they're doing what they're doing, or deny that it matters, deny that it's if it's of any consequence.
Well, for the past couple of weeks, I've actually been browsing compulsive gambler forums, just kind of looking into the stories related to their gambling habits. And it's often the case that their partners will come down quite heavy on them and attribute free will to them, obviously for losing all their money basically, and they always think that they're going to win. And it's this idea of free will that that lets their partner put the blame on them rather than looking for the cause of why they're actually addicted to gambling.
David, I think that's an excellent example. Absolutely.
You're right,
Right.
David, because I hear that all the time, not just gambling, but alcohol or some other drug addiction or smoking or whatever it is. The partner, or other family members blame them for having their addiction, and so and often it just makes the problem worse too. But that's
Right.
an example of everyday situations that people go through.
So trick, like let's say you're going to take the part of the person blaming the person for gambling too much and all. So you're coming. Let's say you'd come from a no free will perspective. What would you say to that person? That would resonate better with them, so they wouldn't have to go into denial.
well, I tell them. Oh, hold on a second. I tell them to kind of look for the causes of that type of situation, and yeah.
Yeah. Well, what I would say is, listen. Basically, something is happening to us. It's kind of like this gambling addiction is affecting you. It's like it's affecting us. In other words, like putting us on the same side, battling against this nebulous addiction thing. Who knows where it comes from, right? And so like with that standpoint, all of a sudden they're on the same side. They're trying to like and the person then doesn't feel indicted. The person maybe feels needed, feels like he's got to help figure out why it's happening, what's causing it. But again, it just like it the idea of like just making sure the person knows it's not your fault. This is happening to you. This isn't something you're happening. I think that's the kind of message they need to hear.
Right, and to be honest, I've read about 50 different stories of people on that forum, and not one of them has brought up the idea that they don't have free will, but a lot of them have related that they do have free will, so it's quite scary.
Yeah.
Strange. I mean, because if they believe that they have a free will, well, then they have to try to uh, they have to reconcile that with their ability to. They can't choose to not have this addiction. If they had a free will, why can't they?
Well, David, you bring up a great point, because like we need to kind of like find the people in society who are most amenable to understanding and know that nobody has a free will. I think the message resonates excellently with atheists. Atheists. I mean, it's like it's another argument against God and all. But like with people who are addicted to gambling, who are addicted to many other things, drugs, whatever. Undesirable behaviors. I think this message would resonate greatly with them. So yeah, I think, because in terms, like, this is like a movement we're trying to like expand, So so I think these and yeah, just like kind of like presenting our message in those forums, they would I think help us kind of like to explain to the world why that if they had a free will, they wouldn't be gambling so much, or they wouldn't be doing whatever they're doing.
Right, right. Yeah, I was considering actually joining the forum and actually kind of posting something along those lines, but I'm not sure how well they would take it because a lot of them seem to think that they seem quite attached to the idea that they have free will, and yeah, it's a confusing
Well,
situation.
David, if you decide to do that, send us all the link. I suggest
Sure, sure. I mean, I'll do it just for the just for an experiment, just to see what kind of reaction I get.
Yeah, because for a while back I was kind of like busy and all, but like if you were to post that link now, whatever, I'd want to like join that discussion and back you up and all. And maybe a few of us could do that also. Yeah.
Yeah,
Sure, sure.
that
Sounds
sounds
good.
like a really good idea because you know what? People who are already caught in this cycle of blame and guilt, these people with addictions they can't help, those people are going to be more receptive to our message than say people where they don't have the same problems, or at least their problems are more easily hideable. They can act like, hey, my life is great because I chose for it to be great. So what's sad about this is that it's always the people who life isn't going well for them that are going to be happier at the no free will message. Isn't that kind of interesting?
Yeah, we're actually on our Manhattan show. Nick and I discussed that last Wednesday. That basically the quote unquote losers in life, whatever, are much more likely to understand than the quote unquote winners. So, but here's the thing: our problem is like the people who have problems like addiction stuff, who just either are poor or unsuccessful or whatever. They might be able to understand this better, but our problem is that it's the rich and powerful who have the power to communicate this message more. So, like, I'm wondering if we can like identify people within the rich and powerful that would be more likely to understand and accept this message because it benefits them personally. Can you guys think of any subset of the rich and powerful to which this would apply?
Yeah, that's a tough one, George, because a lot of times when you hit the rich and powerful status, then the free will thing becomes more important because you want to feel like you've reached that status by yourself and not through some causal mechanism. So it's like it's a double whammy there.
Right. Who knows? Maybe sometimes, like, they neglect their kids. In other words, they're so busy working and with their ambition, they don't spend time. Well, but I'm not sure you'd want to kind of like use that angle, or whatever. But
It's Yeah, this is interesting because here's the deal. It's true. It's going to be the so-called losers in life, like you said. The people who aren't rich, the people who aren't very well liked, the outcasts. The mentally ill, the poor, the drug addicts. Those people, they understand it better, and they benefit the most from it because then they no longer have to feel guilty or that they're responsible for their problems. But here's the deal: while it's difficult to reach, the so-called rich and powerful, well, what happens after these people, after personally benefiting from this message? Then will they end up becoming rich and powerful? I mean, because that could happen.
absolutely. All right, I just had an idea. Basically, a subset of the rich and powerful. I think a lot of people work hard. They're very ambitious, to make a lot of money, become successful because of a social component. They want to like be in a certain social circle. They want to be accepted by people and all. But then there's a certain subset of the rich and powerful who have made their money. Let's say they're computer programmers. They don't have such great social skills, perhaps, or they're not socialites, but they still kind of like want to have like this respect, this esteem from the upper class, whatever. So with them, again, that they thought that they would be fitting in by just making the money and becoming successful, and then they realize, oh my God, there's more to it than that. They have to they have to bring something else to the table. So to the extent that they could kind of you know, understand that nobody has a free will, and they would be much more likely to understand this than the people, who are very well connected and rich and famous. That might give them, well, maybe I'm reaching, but that might give them kind of they could be champions of this very hot new understanding among that class. I don't know. It's,
Yeah.
it's a different one. I could be reaching on that a bit, but yeah, the idea is, but you're right. I think, and this could actually be a movement that's maybe much better accomplished from the bottom up, just like from the gays who get blamed for being gays, the gamblers who get blamed for gambling, the alcoholics, all these people who are really unfortunate. I mean, and they're suffering from their misfortune. And what adds so much to that is they're being blamed. So the 12-step programs. I think that we can target these. Yeah, I think probably, yeah. I think with the rich, they're such a small class anyhow. I think this movement is probably much better championed from the bottom up.
I think it is because there's more of those on the bottom. There's simply more of them, you know.
Though I think George is right. We do have to keep in the back of our minds that if we can get somebody with a higher status, because things go a lot faster and a lot quicker once you have powerful people on board. But yeah, so right now we're just working from bottom up, and it's kind of I don't know. It's just an uphill battle basically. So
It'll take a while, yeah. And,
Yeah.
Yep. All right, we got about a minute and 40 seconds left.
Yeah. So let's see. Yeah. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about in our short time left?
Well, just following up, Trick, on this last thing, basically, a lot of rich and powerful actively reject what we're saying because they feel that it'll threaten their income. In other words, people might conclude, oh my God, if nobody has a free will, that means some people shouldn't be earning $1 billion, a year
Right.
or whatever. So
Yeah.
we need to address that. I think we need to do podcasts about that, explaining how fine, free will belief will change a lot, but still there's still kind of a market economy thing where people get paid according to their utility to economy. I mean, hopefully it wouldn't be as extreme a disparity in income and all, but and the other part is that this wouldn't happen for a decade or so at least.
Right. And there's some people that even though they're at that high status, they do get it, but it's very few people, right? Like there's that one guy, for example, that decided, okay, he's going to pay all of his employees $70,000 a year, and he's going to make $70,000 a year. So he decided to do that, even though he could have been making millions a year and paying his employees, $30,000 or $20,000 a year. He decided to do that because he understood that once you hit a certain income bracket, then the statistics show that you're not really any more happy.
Yeah. So
So
basically, the very smart among the rich and powerful, I think, are our target. The people who will appreciate the benefits and not be afraid of civilization collapsing. All right, guys, we're over the 30-minute mark. This has been great. So we've been talking about how free will belief creates denial, induces denial in people. That when people are denying things, important things like climate change, it hurts us all, and denial also affects our personal relationships. So this has been George Ortega, Trick Slattery, David Joseph, and Chandler Klebs for Free Will, Science, and Religion, and we'll be back again to pursue this topic and explain in more and more ways why we don't have free will and why it matters. Okay.